I didn't pass probation, and I didn't pass probation at my next job. The feedback was always the same. You have absolute flashes of brilliance, but there's just something very erratic in your performance. Your communication skills are off, and it's just too much to have you having to sort of manage you. And I felt deep shame. I felt deep shame about it. So the ADHD diagnosis was a little bit anticlimactic, simply because of the heaviness of the autism diagnosis. When it happened, I cried non-stop for 2 hours. I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. The understanding gave me self-compassion. It gave me self-awareness. And it also gave me inroads into, just figuring out purpose.
Hi everyone, my name is Varia and this is Shameless Careers, the podcast that helps high-achieving professionals redefine success on their own terms and build careers they truly love. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, it really helps me grow the channel. Today's episode is about making a bold career pivot from the business world into a creative life. I'll be discussing this with my guest Haroon. Haroon did his MBA at LBS and worked in several startups, but something never quite clicked. After some major life events, Haroon discovered his creative side and, over time, became an artist and educator, a life that he is really enjoying right now. In this conversation, we're going to talk about what it's like to realize that you don't fit into a traditional career path, how discovering his neurodivergence shaped Haroon's career choices, and what it actually looks like to build a creative career, emotionally, practically, and financially. So, Haroon, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you too. It's an absolute pleasure.
Let's start with your time at LBS. When you joined LBS, do you remember what type of career did you want to pursue?
I'm the byproduct of two immigrant parents. They immigrated from Pakistan in the 70s. When exactly, I don't know, because neither one wants to talk about the timeline. And I do think, immigrating is quite disruptive and traumatic, so I've never really pushed the conversation. But my father's an entrepreneur. He had success, he had failures, he picked himself back up and succeeded. And he really influenced me. And after undergrad, I ended up in the family business for a few years, but I was always very, very restless. I knew that I wanted some sort of control and agency in my career. And I remember looking at someone like Jeff Scott, who was an early employee at eBay. He was successful as an entrepreneur, and then he went on and he started his own film production company, and he did a lot of philanthropy. And I thought, oh, wow, wouldn't it be great to be an entrepreneur and sort of, subvert, I guess, business and be a bit of a rebel, and then find my way to do, to be involved in causes and different types of purposes that suit me. So I went to LBS looking for those tools. Before I was diagnosed with neurodivergence, I always knew that I like having some level of structure, I guess, whether it's a teacher or an educational institution. So I went to LBS with this aspiration of wanting to go pick up these skills. But I think also, again, due to, at the time, undiagnosed autism and ADHD, I severely underperformed in education. I mean, I practically all but failed my A-levels. I dropped out of university from a very low-performing uni. I then went to a mid-tier university at best and came close to dropping out of that as well. I managed to pull myself over the line. I met some people, I networked with some people at LBS, had an unconventional background, hustled my way in.
And after that, you have joined the startup world. Can you tell me about this time and was it what you expected?
I've joined a tech company that was very entrepreneurial. I didn't pass probation, and I didn't pass probation at my next job. I worked for Rocket Internet. The feedback was always the same. You have absolute flashes of brilliance, way up above and beyond the call of duty for the job. But there's just something very erratic in your performance. Your communication skills are off, and it's just too much to have you having to sort of manage you. And these are I look back now, knowing what I know now, if I was helping out someone else, I'd be like, get yourself an ADHD diagnosis and you're probably autistic too. So I had these first couple of instances in tech where the environment was really exciting, but one of the things I really struggle with, I'm very good at rolling my sleeves up. I say it in my book, my debut poetry collection, Press Play. I talk about how I'm very good during wartime and I'm rubbish during peacetime. Part of having ADHD is I absolutely thrive in chaos and problem solving. But once it comes time to be a bit more grown up and to do things that are repeatable, which is what you need in a scale up, my need for stimulation, my need for novelty, I end up just being at war with the people who employed me. I love my time in startups, but there was always going to be a ceiling. There was always going to be a ceiling, and at the same time, if you keep being in that early stage and you're not a founder, you're never going to make money because you're overworked and underpaid. And I was never going to be fit for that stage where you stay a bit longer to see the fruit of your labor, i.e. better title, better money, equity and upside. So, it wasn't going to be, I was en route to probably have a heart attack or be in an early grave due to just, it's not healthy having that level of adrenaline, no matter how much you're craving it, as people with ADHD have. But to be honest, it was a great time. But certain life events happened that actually changed my trajectory and that pulled me out of the startup world.
And what did it feel like to experience this feeling when you don't quite fit into the traditional path? So, for example, when you didn't pass probation or when you felt like in more mature scale-up companies, it wasn't quite the right environment. How did it feel back then and how did you make sense out of it? How did you explain to yourself what was going on?
I mean, I couldn't. I felt deep shame. I felt deep, deep shame about it. Throughout my life, people have always seen that there's something in me. There is this spark. But there's never really been a job that can fit for it. So people always say, look, you're a square peg in a round hole, or, your challenge is you're going to have to convince someone to take a bet on you. And even when I did, the problem is I'd hit my head on a ceiling and I just couldn't move to the next stage. I just felt like a failure. And back then, some of those friends who aren't there now said, you're just not in the right place. There was a lot of shame, huge amounts of stress on my marriage that I was in then. My self-perception was very poor. And in turn, my self-image and my self-talk was very poor. And it was a very damaging time.
And if you could go back in time now, knowing what you know, if you could from that place say something to your younger self now, what would you say?
Bet on yourself. Listen to your instincts, because everything that I'm doing now, where people, the universe, everything that I'm seeing now that is going well, it's all congruent with what my inner voice and my gut was telling me back then. I would say, trust yourself, trust your instincts, take big bets. I think some of it is also just, we'll come to it. A huge amount of it has been getting diagnosed and that journey of self-awareness. Because when I look back in my 20s, I was severely dysregulated. And I look back and I just go, if I had the opportunities, if I stuck with it, I probably would have self-destructed, imploded or burnt bridges. I think back then, it's only really around the pandemic and post-pandemic, we've seen this huge surge of awareness around neurodivergence. And so there's so many things, compassion and self-love that I would love to have given to the earlier version of myself. But fundamentally, a lot of things are a byproduct of sometimes it's just context and environment. That was that time. And there wasn't the language, there wasn't the level of understanding that there is now.
And going back to what's happened next, you said there were some major life events that have also affected your self-discovery. So can you tell me about this time and what have you learned about yourself back then?
Yeah, so basically my marriage ended at the beginning of 2017. And it's just one of those things where, it was very acrimonious, the ends. The divorce was very acrimonious, to the point where I'm actually estranged from my daughter my honest, objective belief is that I don't think that marriage was a vehicle for myself or my ex-wife to be the best versions of ourselves. You know, whatever resentment my ex-wife still has towards me, you know, she's gone on to do TEDx talks about being an educator. She's an incredible educator, a math teacher, and passionate about numeracy. You know, that would not have happened if we were still husband and wife. And I'm on my path now. You know, that marriage ending really opened up the door. I mean, I was already on that path. I struggled with depression since I was 5. Struggled with, and I'll just give a trigger warning, but suicidal ideation since I was 9. I'm 44 years old now. I can comfortably say that this is my first year that I've neither had any depression or any suicidal thoughts, and I got diagnosed with a very difficult chronic health condition at the beginning of this year, and I do have, and it is classified as a disability, and I do have quite a lot of physical and cognitive challenges because I also contracted long COVID, and it's impacted my motor functions, and it has exacerbated a lot of the challenging aspects of ADHD and autism. But that whole thing that set things in motion has gotten me to this stage. And I sought therapy at the end of 2016, so a few months before my marriage ended. Yeah, basically that set of life events set me on a path. I think there were people around me who started spotting my symptoms of autism. And my then therapist, over between, I think, 2017 to 2019, by the end of 2019, she was like, you've got ADHD and you really need to go get it referred and get it diagnosed. She wasn't as willing to say that about autism, but I had my own strong beliefs to the point where I had to self-advocate, and I got into some big arguments with my GP because primary healthcare in this country it's abysmal. It's really, really abysmal. And that's not the fault of the system. It's just where we're at with infrastructure, I think, is quite decaying right now in a country like the UK. But yeah, that journey basically started, and I think I found my creative self because it was there when I was younger.
I wanted to touch upon and zoom into the time when you got diagnosed.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, what did it feel like when you received the diagnosis, and how did it change your self-perception?
And it's not hyperbolic to say this. I honestly believe that I was on a one-way ticket, an accelerated one-way path to an early grave. I honestly believe that, and the diagnosis changed everything. I got my autism diagnosis in August of 2020, and then I spent February and March of 2021 with the ADHD diagnosis. So the ADHD diagnosis was a little bit anticlimactic, simply because of the heaviness of the autism diagnosis. When it happened, I cried non-stop for 2 hours. I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed because I have always had challenging interactions with people, and a lot of it involved a lot of shame, people saying quite negative things. And I don't hold any resentment to people, just my behaviour was what it was, and, you know, that's the stimuli, and how people respond is the response. The more I've leaned into unmasking and embracing my autism, the more I'm able to be logical and not get judgmental about these things. But basically, to this day, I can't read my autism assessment. It's 15 pages of just absolutely triggering incidences from my life of just difficult interactions where I was messing up things in career education. But the understanding gave me self-compassion. It gave me self-awareness. And it also gave me inroads into, you know, just figuring out purpose. I now know that I have a brain that is quite lopsided. It's like I used to fail all the easy stuff at uni, and I used to get like first class honours in the hard stuff. I'm quite weirdly wired that way, so I know now that there's just certain things I'm disproportionately good at, certain things I'm not good at.
And tell me about the time when you discovered the creativity again. So I believe it was the time when your marriage was falling apart,
Yeah,
right?
I think what was really interesting is, rightly, I mean, look, you could be you can say it's spirituality, or you can just say you choose to see what you see. That I really connected with this black queer poet and playwright over in San Diego through Facebook. He really encouraged me. I shared some old pieces. Like, you can write. And I was like, I don't know. And then a writer who's has some published novels. She's working on her current novel, getting it shipped, and it's influenced by Jean-Michel Basquiat, who I'm wearing one of his T-shirts. Is one of my favourite artists, alongside Keith Haring from the 1980s. And I just looked at it and thought, okay, two big people who are taking up space in my life, they're writers. There's a sign here somewhere. And so what happened was that I got a flat. I rented it. It was my first time ever living on my own. And I ended up having the keys for it on April 4th, which was my 36th birthday. And I went to my first open mic since probably 2003, 2004. I think it was somewhere in Guildford that I went to because some old college buddies were doing music and there aren't any poets there. I went and jumped on stage and I performed. And just that was the beginning in 2017. Like, I already knew that. I said to myself, look, that day I said poetry is a gateway drug. I knew there was going to be more to it. And I think by the end of the year, I knew that the company I was at was going to run out of money. I bought myself a digital piano. And I bought myself a sampler and drum machine. I was like, well, I've still got money. I'm just going to buy these things. Had no idea when I was going to use them, but I started stacking up on it. And that digital piano, that was crazy. I almost missed my flight to New York, having to pick it up from Hackney. And I just started picking up stuff. And it was a crazy journey because for 3 years I still worked in tech. I took little sabbaticals. And so 2017 to 2020, I worked for other people. And then I pulled out of tech startups. I retrained as a copywriter, and my God, I barely scraped a living doing that for a good 3 years. But, I performed on and off, and I was writing. I knew I had a book in me. That was a major identity shift, I think, putting the book out. Because as an entrepreneur, I view myself as one, I found an independent press. I put my own money in. I organized my own launch event. I single-handedly did the marketing for it. I sold out the venue. I hired a videographer and we filmed it. I made it a big affair. I brought in other artists and poets. I shared the platform. And just so many things have sort of taken off, but a lot of it has come from I just knew that I'd found my calling. As the artists and creative advocate Stephen Pressfield, he wrote a book called The War of Art. It's just, once you're there, it's no longer a choice. I don't see this as a choice. I haven't chosen this. This has chosen me. And I honestly feel like, my life has been course correction. I think there are some people, they know very clearly what they want to do and they go after it. And I think for others, whether you want to call it God or the universe, I've had a lot of doors shut in my face in order to redirect me. But I'm here. I'm meant to do this. And particularly, I love being on stage. I love being on camera. My social life sometimes, my social interactions are quite tricky due to how I'm wired. But in these settings, I just feel very comfortable in the flow state.
And let's zoom into creative lifestyle. Can you tell me, first of all, what does it look like financially? I can imagine that monetizing art is quite difficult. So how do people do it? And would you recommend someone who is thinking about taking a creative path to potentially start doing it on the side of their job? What does it look like?
Yes, so look, it's a huge step change in lifestyle. I think for me, I was already in pre-Series A startups. So I was never making LBS money after LBS. So I had some prep for that. Even then, huge step down. I think for me, firstly, I live in a very boring part of London. I'm just going to be real. I live in Morden, at the end of the Northern Line. It's Zone 4. Nothing happens there at all. So my overheads are cheap. Probably surviving better than I did, but there were periods in between where I lived off of eggs, lentils, and porridge. I did little temp jobs where my nickname was Quakers because of the brand of oats, because I always used to bring porridge into work. You keep your costs and overhead low. Look, I strongly believe that you should do it on the side. Find ways to sustain yourself. Copywriting has been one way to sustain myself. But, I'm like a frog. I jump from lily pads as I grow in my understanding. Copyright didn't work out. I've been doing educating, and that's great. Right now, I am considering potentially a part-time MA in art therapy. Let's see how that goes, because that combines a lot of strands where I could offer something quite unique, because I don't believe in being the best at something. I believe in being the only one, being a category of one. Just keep finding things you're good at that sustain you. There's a really good writer who wrote a book called Real Artists Don't Starve. He challenges the conventions of the starving artist, but there's a mantra. He says the job of an artist is to make money, to make more art. My job isn't to have a great lifestyle right now. My job is to just make enough to keep sustaining my art. Basically, I will be an overnight success story, but it's an overnight success story like many others that will take 10 to 15 years. So I'm here taking I'm going long, but I just feel like the more you go down a certain path, keep sustaining yourself. And however it is you sustain yourself, be ready to keep pivoting. Be agile. Your main job is to make sure that your fridge and freezer are stocked with food, that you're basically not getting red letters from the phone company, that your mobile phone still stays connected, that, your landlord doesn't dislike you too much. You might miss a few rent payments on time, but you're going to fly close to the sun. But as Seth Godin said about like Icarus and the Icarus deception, we're always taught about the fact that flying close to the sun, it would melt the wax underneath your wings. As Seth Godin said, what people forget also is that if you fly too close to the water, there's actually not enough air below you to give you the buoyancy to stay up, and you can fall and drown in the water. Don't be afraid to, aim higher. As cliched as it is, there's actually less competition going for moonshots and crazy stuff. Whereas the stuff that everyone else has thought of, or that has kind of been carefully mapped out, because it's well identified, kind of everyone is going towards that. So don't be afraid. As Charles Dickens basically said, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. I think that is what I always remind myself of this time right now. Yes, it's crazy. There are mad things going on. Software's been eating the world, and, AI's eating through certain things. But at the same time, there is potentially opportunity. And I think, be aware of everything that's going on and just try and lean into the opportunity, and just try and have fun. I think one of the things I love about my piano teacher, Phil Best, is he said to me, look, if you want to be great, if this is about your ego, there's the door. He's like, if you want to come and play and have fun, my door's open, and I think, be willing to have fun, be willing to lean into ambiguity. Even last week, I laid my uncle to rest. He had terminal cancer. And I think you realize, like, wow, time is finite, and just seize things. Like, again, I'm going to reference a wonderful movie with Robin Williams in it, Dead Poets Society. Being a poet myself, carpe diem, seize the day. One of the things I'd like to sort of wrap this up with is, and I got nominated for Best Page Poet with the Wordplay and Faux Awards, and I'd like to sort of end by basically reading the poem that I was nominated for.
Please.
If that's okay. Yeah, it's called The Great Escape. And what I said here, introducing this poem, is I want a romance like this, even if it's short-lived, God willing, or as we'd say in the Muslim tradition in Arabic, inshallah. So yeah, The Great Escape. I'm desperate to escape borders and visas. Still, I'm stubborn and want more of her. I write, summoning the courage to ask to see her again. Our summer will be the before sunset to our before sunrise. Our romance takes place in a quiet Airbnb from which it seems summertime hues never stop shimmering. Smoggy air and sidewalks packed with street vendors feels as close as I'll ever get to experiencing my ancestral land, the place where I belong but can never belong. I fall in love with the city. Our version. We drink sweetened iced lattes under the bright sun and eat mediocre fried food at a strange American-themed diner and spend nights together in bed, our chests sweaty and sticky. One warm, moonlit evening we sit at a riverfront restaurant where mosquitoes feast on our arms and legs, chain-smoking Lucky Strikes. My eyes radiate with want. On our last night together, I search for a word to call what is ours. How it's blossomed in full, but tomorrow will be left ripe.
Let's go.